Normandy, The Beginning of the End is a two-player tactical platoon-level wargame that portrays combat between American and German forces during the 1944 Normandy campaign in World War II. This game emphasizes on command. Combat units are shown at platoon size, but they operate and are organized into companies with counters for each company commanding officer. Each hex on the maps represents 150 to 200 meters, and each turn about 12 to 15 seconds of real time. The game includes the following components: 4 isomorphic boards, and these show various terrain types, such as open ground, rough terrain, hills, woods, fields, marshes, minor and major rivers, among others. The game includes 4 counter sheets. 2 of these have 5/8 of an inch counters, representing individual platoons and officers. Infantry platoon counters show the following information: the platoon type, the fire factor appears inside a color-coded box. A yellow box shows anti-personnel fire factors. A white box, like the one shown here for this Panther tank, shows anti-tank fire factors. And note that the tank platoon here has also anti-personnel fire factors, as denoted by the white box. Flamethrower fire factors appear in a red box. And finally, artillery fire factors appear inside an orange box. A fire factor printed in red denotes a high rate of fire because of semi-automatic weapons. This results in a favorable -1 die roll modifier for the firing side on the combat chart. The superscript next to the fire factors is the range in hexes at which the unit may fire. Units may also fire at a range up to double the printed range, but the fire factors in that case are halved, with fractions rounded up. At the bottom right-hand corner is the movement allowance, expressed as movement points. As in many tactical games, the cost to enter a particular hex depends on the terrain inside the hex, and this is summarized in the terrain effects chart. The color background in the right upper corner denotes the size of the platoon, which is important for spotting purposes. In this game, to be able to fire at a unit, it must be spotted first. This platoon is small, as denoted by the green coloring. Normal-sized platoons are shown in yellow, while large platoons have red coloring. The letter inside the coloring identifies the company to which the platoon belongs to, in this case to Company A. Below this letter is the assault value. This is used when the platoon engages in assault combat, which occurs against enemy units in the same hex. The game emphasizes on command, and command at company level. Therefore, each company has a company officer. Let's take a look at the information on the officer counters. The counters show the leadership and coordination value of the officer. Officers have a command range, which is used to determine if their platoons are in command or out of command. Officers also have a morale rating. And of course, a movement allowance appears in the bottom right-hand corner. In this game, a full-strength platoon consists of 3 steps. When it receives its first step loss, it remains front side up, but a -1 step loss marker is placed on the unit. When it receives a second step loss, the unit is flipped to its reduced side, and that is if the unit has the same picture on both sides, like this infantry unit. If the pictures on both sides are different, as is in the case of this particular unit, we place a -2 step loss marker on the front side of the unit. There is one sheet of 5/8 of an inch markers that are used to keep track of step losses, units that have finished their action, units marked for reaction, and markers for routed and out-of-command units. There are markers used to resolve artillery attacks, and markers for diverse types of obstacle terrain. There are two counter sheets with 3/4 of an inch counters. On the Allied side, there are various types of Sherman tanks, M10 Wolverine tank destroyers, M7 Priest and M8 self-propelled howitzers, as well as M16 half-tracks. There's also artillery, anti-tank, machine gun, and mortar platoons. The Allies have U.S. air units represented in the game, such as P-47s and P-38 fighter bombers. On the German side, there are platoons of half-tracks, Panzer IVs, Panthers, and Tigers, as well as artillery, mortar, and machine gun platoons, among others. The game includes 3 sheets containing terrain overlays. These are cut and placed on the map according to specific scenario instructions. The game also includes various 8.5 by 11-inch cardstock player aid cards, and these include various charts and tables needed for play, such as the terrain effects chart, which shows the movement costs, defensive values, effect of line of sight, and terrain height of each of the terrain types found on the maps. There's also a chart to keep track of battalion morale, and a combat chart to resolve fire attacks. There's also a hand-to-hand combat chart, and many others. There's even a chart with optional random events. The game comes with version 2 of the War Storm series rules. The rulebook has 48 pages and is in full color, and contains many illustrated examples of play of each of the game mechanics. The rulebook is organized into 6 sections and uses a programmed instruction approach. At the end of each section, players are encouraged to play a scenario that incorporates the rules just covered. The game also includes a 12-page exclusive rules booklet, which contains a historical background section and rules for Navalwerfer rockets, DD tanks, U.S. Army Rangers, bocage terrain, irrigation ditches, shingles, as well as airborne drops and amphibious assaults, and also rhinos, and these are American tanks equipped with hedge-cutting devices. And finally, there are rules on how to design your own point-based scenarios. The game is divided in turns, and each turn represents about 12 to 15 seconds of real time. Each turn is divided into the following phases. First, the command phase. During this phase, players simultaneously determine which of their platoons are in command and which are out of command. A platoon is in command if it is at a distance in hexes equal to or less than its officer's command range. The next phase is the initiative phase. Here, players determine which side has the initiative, and this is done by each side rolling 1d6 and modifying the result as follows. A +1 if the scenario indicates a player is the attacker, a +1 if the player had the initiative during the preceding turn, plus or minus a particular number as indicated by any scenario-specific rules, and ties are re-rolled. Next is the activation phase and performing actions. Here, beginning with the player with the initiative, players alternate activating either an officer, including all his in-command platoons, or activating an out-of-command platoon. Out-of-command platoons are activated only after successfully passing a morale check. An infantry platoon, when activated, may perform one of the following actions. It may open fire at an enemy unit. It may move using its movement allowance or by mounting and dismounting from a transport vehicle. Or it may prepare for reaction. And here, a reaction marker is placed on the platoon, which will allow it to be activated and fire during the opponent's activations. When both players pass consecutively, this phase ends. And finally, there's the marker removal phase. Here, we remove all out of command, finished, and if desired, reaction markers. Let's take a look at some examples of play. In this attack example, a German company, Company D, is comprised of one platoon in hex 911 with one step loss and two other platoons, each with one step loss, with their officer in hex 910. The American player activates his Company A with its officer in 1309 and one machine gun and two infantry platoons in hex 1209. The platoons in 1209 open fire using anti-personnel fire factors against the German platoons in 910. The infantry anti-personnel fire factors are halved because the enemy platoon is out of range, but the distance is less than or equal to twice the range. So the initial 12 anti-personnel fire factors are reduced to 6. The American machine gun fires with its full anti-personnel fire factors, that is 3. So the final strength of the attack is 9 fire factors. Next, we check the combat chart for any applicable modifiers. In this example, a -1 die roll modifier applies because of the use of semi-automatic fire, shown by the red anti-personnel fire factors of the attacking infantry platoons. There's also a +1 die roll modifier because the attack's line of sight crosses a bocage hex side. So the final modifier for the combat dice roll is 0. The American player rolls 2d6, and the result is 3, with no modifiers. This is cross-referenced with the 9 fire factor column on the combat chart to obtain a result of 6. Now we divide the combat result, 6, by the applicable terrain divisor. Open terrain has a value of 2 as shown in the terrain effects chart. The attack caused 3 hits on the 2 German platoons, and each platoon had previously lost a step, as indicated by the -1 step loss counters on each platoon. We first check for any hits on the officer. A final modified dice roll of 1 or less eliminates the officer. We roll 2d6 and 1 is subtracted for every hit that the officer's platoon received during the attack. The roll is a 6, the modified dice roll is a 3, which is higher than 1, therefore the officer does not receive any damage. Now we allocate the 3 hits between the 2 platoons present in the attacked hex. There are no veterans or green platoons, and both platoons have the same amount of steps, so we assign the first hit randomly. After that, the second hit is assigned to the other platoon because it now has lost fewer steps. So each platoon had previously received 1 hit, and now their counters are flipped to their reduced sides. So far we have allocated 2 of the 3 hits. The third hit is now assigned randomly to one of the 2 platoons, which results in its elimination. Let's take a look at a reaction example. Here the Americans activate Company A and move one of its platoons from hex 610 to 710. Now the German platoon in 909, which has not been previously activated, decides to react to this movement. Note that it doesn't have a reaction marker, and therefore it attacks with half of its fire factors, that is 3. For purposes of this example, we assume that the attack caused no hits. After the attack is resolved, the German platoon is marked as finished, and the American platoon continues its movement and now moves from hex 710 to 711, where it is marked as finished. Note that the Germans could have tried to use the platoon in 806, which is marked with a reaction marker, but they preferred to reserve that platoon to react to another American movement. Next, the American platoon in 610 moves to 710, and from there to hex 810. Now the German platoon in 806, which is marked with a reaction marker, decides to react. Its fire factors are not reduced for reaction fire, but because of range. The platoon is firing from 4 hexes away, which exceeds its range of 2, but is not greater than double the range. The attack is resolved, and we assume it causes no hits. The reaction marker is removed from the German unit, and it is marked as finished. The American platoon finishes its movement, and it is now marked also as finished. Finally, the last American platoon and its officer in hex 609 move to 610, and from there to 710. Now the 2 German platoons in hex 706 decide to react and attack at half fire factors. Again, although both platoons are marked with a reaction marker, they are 4 hexes away from the attacked unit, so they fire with 6 fire factors. Once the attack is resolved, and we assume here that it produced no hits, the reaction markers are removed and both platoons are marked as finished. The American platoon and the officer finish the movement and are marked as finish as well. The German mortar platoon in hex 806 may not attack because the rules prevent artillery fire factors from firing in reaction. Coordination allows the activation of 2 companies simultaneously as if all of the corresponding platoons belong to the same company for activation purposes. This coordination is useful for close assault purposes, as we shall show here. Here, the Americans want to coordinate Lieutenant Jones in hex 311 with Lieutenant Hunt in hex 710 to attack the town occupied by the Germans. Jones is designated as the main officer, and he can attempt to coordinate with Hunt as they are 4 hexes apart, which is equal to double the command range of Jones. Note, however, that Hunt could not be designated as the main officer in this case because the distance between both officers is higher than double Hunt's command range of 1. For coordination to be successful, we roll 1d6, and the result has to be equal or less than the combined leadership values of both officers. The Americans roll 1d6, and the result is a 3, so the coordination is successful. If the result would have been 4, 5, or 6, coordination would have failed and only Jones' company would have been activated. Next, the Americans proceed to activate platoons of both companies. The Americans start by opening fire on the German platoons in hex 410, and this hex has dispersed buildings terrain. The Americans fire with the 2 infantry platoons under the command of Lieutenant Jones in hexes 211 and 311, forming a fire group with 12 anti-personnel fire factors. The result of the attack die roll is a 5. The 2 values are cross-referenced on the combat chart, and the result, 6, is divided by 4, which is the defense value of the dispersed buildings against an anti-personnel attack. The result is 1 hit, which is equivalent to 1 step loss. The German player chooses which of his 2 platoons in 410 will be marked with 1 step loss. Next, the 81mm mortar platoon fires a smoke mission against hex 510. The result of the die roll is a 3, so the mission is successful. The Americans activate Lieutenant Hunt and conduct group movement from hex 710 to hex 510, which is adjacent to the 2 German platoons. The Germans have to decide whether they will react to this movement now, or if they reserve reacting to when the Americans enter their own hex using final defensive fire. Note that there is no smoke marker in the Germans' hex, which would modify, that is, reduce their fire. The Germans decide, therefore, to wait, also because their platoons don't have reaction markers. So Lieutenant Hunt declares an assault into Hex 410 with the 3 platoons of his company. Now each one of the assaulting platoons has to make a pre-assault morale check. Lieutenant Hunt decides to accompany his men, and that is without needing to check morale himself. The morale of these platoons, which do not have any step losses, is 9. Lieutenant Hunt's morale of 7, and he is accompanying his men in the assault so that his leadership value of 2 can be added for a total morale of 9. 2d6 rolled for each platoon, and they need a 9 or less to pass the pre-assault morale check. The first dice roll is a 7, and the first platoon passes the morale check and is moved into the assaulted hex. The second dice roll is a 5, and the second platoon also passes and moves into the assault hex. The third and last platoon rolls a 9 and also passes the check. Therefore, all 3 platoons have been moved to Hex 410 to assault it. And after all platoons have moved, Lieutenant Hunt joins his troops and also moves into the assaulted hex. Next, the German platoons, 1 infantry platoon with 1 step loss, and a machine gun platoon at full strength, may now perform final defensive fire as a fire group. The fire factors of the fire group is a total of 9. That is 4 for the machine gun plus 5 for the infantry, whose 6 fire factors are reduced by 1 because they have suffered a step loss. Because neither platoon has a reaction marker, their fire factors are halved to 5, rounded up, for fire factor calculations. The applicable modifiers to the Germans' final defensive fire are -1 for more than 6 American steps being involved, and another -1 for firing on moving platoons, for a total -2 die roll modifier. 2d6 are rolled, and the result is a 9 modified to a 7. This is cross-referenced with the 5 fire column, which produces no losses. So Lieutenant Hunt and his men are lucky and avoid any losses from final defensive fire. After receiving final defensive fire and having reached this point, we now proceed to the assault resolution. And because the assaulting and assaulted platoons are troops and machine guns, the assault type is hand-to-hand. First, we calculate the assault values. The assault value of the German platoons is 5. The infantry with 1 step loss has a value of 3, and the machine gun without any losses has a value of 2. The assault value of the assaulting American platoons is 12. Each of the infantry platoons without a step loss has a value of 4. Now we consult the odds chart, and the odds are 2.5 to 1, which is the column in the hand-to-hand chart which will be used for resolving the assault. And the following modifier applies to this die roll: a +1 for an assault in a built-up hex. The roll is a 3 modified to a 4, and the result is 1/1R2. Now the result is applied, and this means that 1 American platoon receives a step loss, and also the German machine gun. In addition, the German platoons must retreat 2 hexes. Lieutenant Hunt has succeeded in liberating the village, and he must now check to see if he survived the assault, since one of his platoons suffered a step loss. 2d6 are rolled and 1 is subtracted from the result because the Americans suffered 1 step loss. The roll is a 9 modified to an 8, so Hunt remains alive. The game includes much more than is covered in this video, like armored fighting vehicles, partisans, artillery, beach landings, and airborne drops. In all, 23 scenarios are included, and some are about the most iconic battles of the campaign. Last May, my family and I visited Normandy, and because this is a game about the Normandy campaign, we'll finish this video with a short video clip about the visit. I hope you like it, and as I always say, this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.